Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in to the avatar of Khaine and his rise in competitive play. Ladies and gentlemen, the king has arrived. So the avatar of Khaine is one of those really awesome models that everybody wishes they could field in their armies. Unfortunately, over the past, pretty much 6 months, he hasn't really been that good. When the Codex came out, there were far better options than the Avatar of Khaine. As we know, the Avatar of Khaine was severely nerfed since its Index iteration. And since then, people have been a little bit apprehensive about taking him. He did get reduced in points from the Index days, but the change in power level was quite severe. Fast forward till today, he's at a reasonable point cost, and he actually fills a role that the Eldar don't really have, which is a tough bruiser unit that can dominate the mid-board. With clever play, of course, like all Eldar units. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right in and talk about why the Avatar of Khaine is all of a sudden on people's minds. So first, we're going to dive into his datasheet, stats, weapons, and special rules. We're going to analyze his strengths and weaknesses, his combos and synergies, and we're going to be finally talking about why you should think about taking the Avatar in certain builds, and lastly, how to effectively use the Avatar of Khaine on the battlefield, which I will show you on Tabletop Simulator with a few examples. So first off, we have the datasheet itself. So if we look at this datasheet, pretty standard, big monster, centerpiece model character here. So movement 10, which is actually pretty fast for a foot-based monster. We have toughness 11, which is down 1 from the index, but still rather respectable. It means things like missile launchers and stuff. Things that have multiple shots are going to be wounding on 5s, doomsday arcs and the like. We have a 2+ save, which is, that's the best in the game. That's as best as it gets. We have 14 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 5. Now that OC 5 is pretty big. That means that typically speaking, you're going to need a full unit of anything, a full unit of 5, to be able to contest objectives from him. That means things like vehicles and dreadnoughts, usually can't contest an objective from him in most cases without an additional unit. This means that the Avatar of Khaine draws a lot of units out into the midboard by his mere presence. And of course, depending on how the terrain is set up, which layout it is, etc., you might find yourself very favorably in the lead in primary as an Aeldari player using the Avatar of Khaine. Now, looking at his weapons, we have the Wailing Doom. So the Wailing Doom is still very powerful. It's just as powerful as it was in the index, however, no fate dice, and that's gonna hit something with sustained hits D3 pretty big. Having said that, it does still have a pretty powerful punch here. Range 12, 1 attack, hits on a 2, of course, strength 16, AP -4, damage D6 +2. That can get better in certain detachments, but it is kind of hit or miss. I've had games where he's actually rolled the 6 to hit and just obliterated something, and I've had games where he's just rolled a 1 to hit and just missed and done nothing with this range attack. It's better to think of this as a nice to have rather than a must for the unit to be good. For his melee weapon, we have the strike and the sweep. So the strike is actually really powerful with 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 16, AP -4, damage D6 +2. This will wreck most things it comes into contact with pretty easily, and it basically means he's hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s most of the time against tough targets. Against infantry, he's also very good with a sweep that has 12 attacks, hitting on 2 still, with strength 8, AP -2, damage 2. Very good at taking out marine profiles, which is what a lot of people are going to be putting out on objectives to deal with this guy and just kind of steal OC from you. And he's happy to just kind of just, sweep away Marine units, and then of course use his battle focus tokens to get back into hiding. As for his abilities, he does have battle focus, of course, and the Molten Body, which halves all damage of, weapons that are directed against him. So essentially, it just halves the damage characteristic of attacks. This is very rare, and it's becoming more rare as we go further on into the edition. A lot of people complain about this type of ability, that it's OP and everything. And as we currently saw, even though they did buff the Necron Satan, they now only have damage -1. So no more half damage for them. That's unfortunately going to be going by the wayside. And I think probably this is something we're going to lose come 11th edition. I think if, I had, my little feelers out there and I could guess at some of the rules that they were going to introduce, it would be that half damage abilities would be changed. And probably just basically those characters are going to be either given more wounds or some sort of feel no pain. He also has a pretty useful aura. Now, this aura is interesting because a lot of people discount it as an actual ability. While an Aeldari unit is within 6 of this model, keep in mind that that is all Aeldari units, not just infantry, but everything. So that means your vehicles, your monsters, Wraith Lords, Wraith Blades, everything. Aspect Warriors, Jet Bikes. They're all getting +1 to their advance and charge rolls. Now, this is very good for getting into positions. I really like to use it on things like Corsairs. When I am, kind of moving up the field, I like to string a Corsair along in the back, and this allows them to advance further up the field so that they can get to where they need to go for scoring purposes and stuff like that. This is also really good on Howling Banshees because this will add 1 to their advance, of course, and their charge rolls if the avatar is nearby. And of course, I think Howling Banshees pair perfectly with the Avatar of Khaine because their ability to strike first and prevent opponents from doing solid chip damage with, kind of crappier units until they, kind of deal the killing blow to them. So this can save the Avatar a lot of wounds over the course of the game. Now, as for his cost, he does cost 280. This is considerably less than he did at the beginning of the edition. So he started off really expensive once they finally nerfed Eldar to a decent place in the very beginning of the edition. And in the Codex, granted, he's not as good as the Index model, but he is still pretty powerful at 280. I still think that we are kind of missing something from this datasheet here, but to be honest with you, I think it's mostly just because the, kind of monsters that he's typically compared to are really overpowered. So we're talking about like Satan, some of the, demon Primarchs, I mean, those models are more expensive than he is. A demon Primarch runs like 300 and some points, so he's not really comparable to that. But, things like Satan, which he is comparable to, are just better because they have better rules at this current moment. Okay. So let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the Avatar of Khaine. So first of all, I think his main strength then is in an Eldari army, he is an outlier for being extremely durable. He takes up a lot of your opponent's attention. Whether he's actually visible to them or not, your opponent's going to have to plan around that. So his durability is a big factor here. He hits extremely hard in melee, and even though he doesn't have fights first himself, heroically intervening into a squishy unit that he can just kill will prevent a lot of opponents from, just recklessly diving into your trash units that are on objectives. So, for example, Rangers at 55 points, your opponent is unlikely to want to throw away a unit of jump pack intercessors going after Rangers if the Avatar of Khaine is going to be right there anyway. So this prevents a lot of secondary options for your opponent. That storm hostile objective that your opponent wants to get is all of a sudden much more difficult. He also benefits from battle focus, of course. So he gets faster, so that speed 10 goes up to speed 12, and he can, also use reactive moves. So he can use the reactive move after he gets shot. This is very good for damage multiplier types of combos. If your opponent has something that gives them +1 to wound against you after they shoot with a certain unit, or reroll ones to hit, like if an exocrine hits him or something like that, then he can just simply move back and out of line of sight once more. So those other units that were about to hit him are not going to be able to do so. So increases the durability considerably, getting battle focus. Also, can't really be tied up in combat if your opponent falls back, because he can just move d6 +1. Next, however, let's talk about his weaknesses. So his weaknesses are that he is a big model and that he is sometimes difficult to maneuver around terrain, especially on the more dense boards, right? This is an advantage and a disadvantage for the Avatar of Khaine. He gets more coverage from shooting, so less shooting is going at him, but at the same time, it can be difficult to move the guy around. He is also pretty expensive, and I think really his cost is probably fine, but they need to nerf some of the, big monsters from other factions that are around his cost. So I think, for example, the new Necron Satan shards, I think, are way undercosted. They need to be brought up to a respectable amount. It's totally fine to have powerful characters in your army and all that stuff, but I think it becomes a problem when you're running like 5 of them and all of them are better for the points than your Avatar. That's a little insane. And the Avatar is a good model for the points. I don't think he's bad at all in this current meta. Lastly, he is a big target. So, big base size means that it's a little harder to hide, and he's very, very visible. So you can't really hide him behind walls that effectively. You really need to hide him behind ruined footprints for him to be immune to shooting. Okay, now here is the part of the video where we talk about why the Avatar is so powerful in these two detachments. So the Avatar of Khaine is decent in other detachments, but he's not great, right? He's not great in Seer Council, for example. He's not great in Guardian Battle Host, right? So these other detachments are typically more defensive. He's not great in a defensive detachment because he's not really a defensive model. He is an aggressive model that, basically wants to be in melee, wants to control your opponent's movements. If you're playing very passively and defensively with him, if he's not somewhere in the midboard, honestly, he's useless. So Warhost and Aspect Host are the perfect homes for him, and they also ironically give him the most buffs and synergies. So Warhost is actually the detachment I prefer him in, not because it gives him more damage, but because it gives him more utility and more speed. It gives him the ability to more reliably get out of tricky situations and also get to where he needs to be. And that's mostly due to the fact that you have that improved battle focus. So you have a battle focus that is allowing you to move 13 inches instead of 12. This might not seem like that big of a deal, but when you add on the fact that he can also advance d6 +1, yes, the Avatar of Khaine does benefit from his own aura for that +1 to advance rolls. He can pretty much on turn 1 come from a safe spot in your backfield all the way up to the midboard. And Warhost allows you to do this more effectively. These strats in Warhost are also very good. He can get fallback, shoot, and charge, so your opponent can't just tie up the Avatar like they can in other detachments. So if they want to throw 20 orcs at him and they know 20 orcs isn't going to kill him because they need, 6s to wound or whatever, then obviously you could just fall back, shoot, and charge something else, right? That big orc knob squad with Ghazghkull is right there. Let's charge them into that and wreck those knobs. Or at least hopefully you roll decently. And lastly, the -1 to hit is really helpful, especially against units that have higher damage profiles. A lot of armies out there have units with, damage 3 or damage 4 melee weapons that are going to do 2 damage to the Avatar. This adds up over time. Usually, 2 damage weapons are not a big deal because they're reduced to 1. 3 damage weapons, however, are a big deal because they get reduced to 2, but that's still only 7 failed invulnerable saves away from death. So a -1 to hit is going to put those weapons that Typically speaking, those damage 3 weapons, those big weapons, they hit on 4s, right? So being able to, -1 to hit on them so they hit on 5s, or, perhaps it's a more elite unit and they're hitting on 3s, making those weapons hit on 4s is going to be a big boost and hopefully allow your avatar to survive to exact vengeance. In Warhost, he also benefits from blitzing firepower, which in a pinch can give you a 5+ crit on your Wailing Doom. So if you really need something dead and it's that part of the game where, you just have extra CP to spend, you don't have many models left, and you're like, well, I have the avatar, I've played him well so far, I've kept him kind of out of my opponent's last cannons and, multi-meltas and all that kind of stuff. And now it's time for him to go in and do some big dick damage. You can throw a, measly command point away for a 5+ crit on a Wailing Doom. I don't know. It's definitely not something you should plan around getting, but it is nice that he can benefit from this stratagem. Okay, next is the Aspect Host. So if Warhost was all about utility and speed, Aspect Host is all about the damage. So the Aspect Host allows him to reroll 1s to hit or wound. Usually this is going to be on the hit roll because he's going to be hitting most things on a 2+. So being able to hit on a 2+ is fantastic. Now, alternatively though, you might argue that against things that are like -1 to hit or something like that, you might want to go for the wound roll instead, which is, perfectly fine depending on the target's toughness and all that. Typically speaking though, this is a pretty big boost to his damage. It gives him more reliability in combat, which means he's, more consistent at killing the things you need him to kill. These strats also give him a myriad of damage buffs that are not available in other detachments. So, Warrior's Bane is a great example of this, allowing you to ignore ballistic skill, weapon skill, strength, armor penetration, damage, and hit roll modifiers. So, ignoring stealth, ignoring annoying -1 to hit abilities, ignoring, stupid armor of contempt, ignoring all that kind of stuff. Against Nurgle, right? Against Death Guard, being able to ignore both the weapon skill debuff here and hit debuffs that they can pass out to you is massive. It's really good. So, it basically turns him into a model that can deal with harder matchups for combat. The other strats in the detachment are also interesting on this guy. You have a 4+ fight on death, which honestly in some situations could be worth it. I know it's only a 4+, guys, but there's going to be points in matches where a 4+ could mean you score primary or don't. And I know on paper it looks risky, but oftentimes experienced players will just go for it. And plus, having the option means your opponent has to play differently around it because it's a coin flip. Your opponent doesn't want to bet the game on a coin flip. So they are going to play, at least better players, are going to play more carefully around that. Also, being able to force desperate escape tests for non-vehicles and monsters is pretty good. So, again, not the best here, but if your opponent needs to fall back with something that the Avatar of Khaine tied up in combat, they're going to have a harder time doing it because of this desperate escape test stratagem. And lastly, there is a significant range and damage boost to his Wailing Doom. Now, this stratagem I have often found to be a waste. To be straight up with you guys, it's kind of a waste. I've never really used it that much, but I will say this. It's in that same camp as that blitzing firepower that I talked about in Warhost. If you have extra CP at the end of the game, or even in the beginning of the game, if you have extra CP because, you really didn't need to use any during the first turn, remember Skyborn Sanctuary is nerfed. We don't really need to use that a whole lot. So, maybe a single command point for an 18-inch strength 16 AP -4 shot that does 8 damage. Not a bad use of CP, especially against lighter stuff that only has 8 wounds. Really good against dreadnoughts that have 8 wounds. Really good against, kind of not tough vehicles, but, vehicles that are like, for scouting purposes and stuff like that. So being able to just, shoot something at 18, do a bunch of damage to it is good. Also, just being able to wound something at 18 inches is nice, and be at a good range to where if you do get shot back, you can just kind of duck back behind cover with battle focus. It's not the worst thing in the world. So I think both of these detachments are really good for the Avatar of Khaine. I know a lot of competitive players prefer Aspect Host to it, but I honestly, it's a toss-up. For me, I like the improved speed, but that's because, of my own playstyle personally, and because I really like a Dragon Brick in my list, and Dragon Bricks no longer work in Aspect Host. So, it's just one of those things you have to compromise on, unfortunately. But Aspect Host is still really good, and I plan to make a video on it coming up featuring the Avatar of Khaine, because I think he's awesome in both of these detachments, and I think that he is just going to be an absolute menace in competitive play for the Aeldari. So, why take the Avatar of Khaine? Now, we already hit on a couple of these points, but I do want to kind of go into more detail about it. So, one of the great things about the Avatar of Khaine is, unlike most Eldari builds that can't really prevent an opponent from scoring Bring It Down, maybe they have a Warwalker, but the Warwalker maybe came out and shot last turn, so it's an easy target. Maybe we have a Falcon. Falcons are also an easy target. Maybe it kind of popped itself out a little bit to shoot at something so that the squad inside could get rerolls to wound. All that great stuff. It is possible to bring those things down very easily. The Avatar of Khaine is almost impossible to bring down in a single activation. Unless your opponent's running like a Shadow Sword Baneblade or something ridiculous like that, there's a very little chance that the Avatar of Khaine will die to one hit. Case in point, I play against Nids a lot. I play against the Tyrannifex a lot. My buddy hit my Avatar of Khaine for 2 shots, and when they rolled damage, because of course I failed both my invols and I failed a command reroll, he rolled a 10 on 2 dice. Meaning that I basically took like 20 some damage, right? 22 damage is what I took. However, because of the Avatar of Khaine's half damage ability, I actually was able to survive the hit with a couple wounds left, and this allowed me to get into a position where he was hidden. So he got another turn of activation that he really shouldn't have gotten, right? And my opponent did have Bring It Down that turn, and they couldn't score Bring It Down because of that. So that's 4 points that my opponent can't score, right? That gives me the advantage. Especially as the Aeldari player, you really want to bank on winning secondaries. If you're not winning the secondary game, something has gone very wrong for you as an Eldar player. So being able to deny enemy secondaries is also very important for winning games. The Avatar of Khaine can help out with this. It also forces your opponent to account for the Avatar's damage and threat range. So having the Avatar of Khaine in your list in the midboard forces your opponent to have a plan to play around it. If your opponent is not expecting a big monster like this that can half damage, they can use battle focus dice and stuff like that, and they're kind of going into the matchup thinking you're going to bring a typical Eldari army without the Avatar of Khaine, then they might be in some trouble, right? In a competitive setting. So that's also a plus. Next, the Avatar has really solid OC. It's not quite as big as Knights or anything like that, but OC 5 is really good. And even when he is bracketed, he doesn't lose any OC value. And he has really good durability for primary control. Again, you put this guy on a primary objective, and chances are your opponent's not going to be able to get to it if this guy's properly supported. So things like Howling Banshees nearby, stuff like that can really help out. Now, if your opponent just wants to steal, put battle line units on there with OC10 and just kind of, deny your primary in the midboard, that's also fine because they're going to lose out in the long run of the game. They're going to lose out on their resources. Whereas, realistically, those type of battle line units are never going to do anything to the Avatar of Khaine in combat or from shooting. So, putting them on that objective or, they probably won't charge the Avatar of Khaine, but just putting them on that objective gives you easy secondary missions to score, right? Things like Storm Hostile Objective, Overwhelming Force, you know, extend enemy battle lines, stuff like that, that you can just easily score because your opponent has to prevent you from scoring primary victory points, right? So the Avatar, even if he actually doesn't score primary himself because your opponent's throwing stuff at the objective, what is happening is your opponent is able to capitalize on this with possible secondary draws. And lastly, and again, this is what I've mentioned many times before, but if positioned well, you can get multiple activations out of it throughout the game. So I've had games literally where, yeah, a little bit of luck here and there, rolling a lucky invul save against Alaskan and stuff like that has saved this guy's ass. But I've had him last until the end of the game on many occasions. And on the occasions that he doesn't last to the end of the game, my opponent is really accounting for him and moves almost their entire force sometimes in a position to kill him, which means that I can exploit my opponents in other ways, right? So if you pair the Avatar of Khaine with really fast moving units like Warp Spiders, you can put your opponent in a really awkward position where they have to choose, right? Kill the Avatar of Khaine at the cost of 2 or 3 of my vehicles when I bring in Fire Dragons next turn, right? Or kill the Avatar of Khaine at the cost of my Blade Guard Veteran or Victrix Honor Guard squad, which I needed to charge in to actually kill this guy, right? And now that Victrix Honor Guard is in the middle of the battlefield, and I can surround it with Warp Spiders and wipe it out. And then, that's a large chunk of my opponent's army, for example. So there's a lot of ways that you can get a lot out of the Avatar of Khaine. And although I don't think he is the most competitive unit of his weight class in the game, I think he is actually pretty good for the Aeldari. And I think he serves a role that many opponents fighting Aeldari and expecting a traditional Aeldari experience will have trouble dealing with. Okay, so without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into Tabletop Simulator so I can show you a bit, or at least a few, of the tricks of the trade with the Avatar of Khaine, where you should put them on the battlefield, and what you should look for and look out for. Be right back in just a second. Alright guys, welcome to Tabletop Simulator, where we'll be talking about how to position the Avatar effectively on the battlefield and make him an absolute nightmare for your opponent. So one of the first things that you have to think about when using the Avatar is, how does the Avatar affect what my opponent does and how they set up the game? So one of the weird things I like to do with the Avatar is I like to put him down as one of my first drops. Probably not the first drop, but like the second drop, right? Like after everybody's kind of deployed their infiltrators and stuff like that, I like to put my Avatar down. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, this is going to affect where your opponent puts their units, right? And two, it's a little bit ballsy. It basically is like dropping your balls on the table. Like it's pretty badass. So you deploy your Avatar second. You're like, my Avatar is right here. Your opponent has to match the Avatar with something of their own. Now, extremely skilled players may not even react to this, right? But most players will. Most players will immediately start to think of ways to deal with the Avatar. How do I block the Avatar? How do I kill the Avatar if it comes out? I need to be ready for the Avatar of Khaine. So basically what they'll do is they'll deploy their anti-large units, units that can take out the Avatar. Things like Ballistas Dreadnoughts, Gladiator Lancers, and those kind of things, Predator Annihilators. So the best way, like, okay, for example, this is our, kind of hammer and anvil, classic hammer and anvil layout here, where we have the terrain set up, long ways. Putting your Avatar kind of in the middle, but closer to your expansion objective, tells your opponent that you are going to go that direction. Now, here's the cool thing about the Avatar of Khaine and the Aeldari, though. You do not have to go that direction, right? it looks like you're going that direction. And again, this is where, the mind games start with the Eldari, right? In a competitive setting. Because obviously, if you're practicing with somebody, it's a little different. But if you're playing a competitive game, Warhammer 40k, you put this here, it's closer to your expansion, you are basically issuing a challenge to your opponent, and, what are you going to do about it? Usually they're going to respond with shit like this, right? All right, well, if you move out to this expansion, then I have my Lancers, I have all this that can, if you move anywhere outside of this piece of terrain here, I have you down pat. If you move out to the middle objective, you'll die, right? By the way, it's never a good idea to have your avatar move to the middle. However, I will say this, right? The other thing that you have to keep in mind is how small the avatar's base is and whether or not he can actually fit through the middle of these walls right here. So if you're playing a competitive match of 40k and you're trying to mirror the actual terrain, the actual ruin walls on GW layouts, let me just clone this avatar for a second to show you. The avatar of Khaine actually fits through this quite easily. Quite easily. You can see his base fits through. He has an 80 millimeter base, whereas a lot of models actually have a bigger base than he does. So there's models in the Space Marine Army that can't fit through there, right? A Gladiator Lancer cannot fit through. Well, yeah, can't fit, I don't think. No, it's way too big, right? Now, I mean, some events will, say, oh, yeah, sure, you can fit it through, but I mean, that's a stretch, right? Like, you can't really plan around that. The Ballistus Dreadnought. Now, if we compare the Ballistus Dreadnought's base to the Avatar's base, quite a bit bigger, as you will notice. The Ballistus Dreadnought is, fatter than the Avatar as well. So, can the Ballistus fit through this area? I think so, but barely. I mean, it's like a tight fit. Let's find out. So it looks like it's a very tight fit, but he can fit through. So the Ballistus can fit through. Anything bigger than a Ballistus Dreadnought's base is not fitting, right? So that means that you kind of have an ace up your sleeve here. With this Avatar of Khaine, you could go for this objective, but if your opponent leaves this expansion open, their expansion open, you can and should go after that. Like if your opponent loads up a bunch of stuff here to the, to their right side, your left side of the battlefield, to kill the Avatar of Khaine, there's nothing stopping you from just doing this with an advance roll and a token, right? Nothing at all. Now, the other interesting thing about this is basically in this position here, you have quite a bit of safety from enemy shooting. The only thing you really have to worry about is combat. And again, we can set up, I know the Howling Banshees are right here, but we can set up our Howling Banshees right by our Avatar of Khaine so they can either advance over here or advance over here if they want to, right? And take out whatever's behind this ruin. If they have, something back here, for example, lurking after the Avatar, we can find a way to hide our Banshees here. And really, the only threats that are going to be able to attack our Banshees are going to be stuff way back over here. And again, if you look at the range here, right, if something moves up here to attack the Banshees, they're going to need they're going to need like basically heavy bolters, something with 38-inch range or something. Usually weapons that can take out Banshees effectively are 24 inches. So that's asking a lot from a turn one. Now this obviously, this scenario is if we go first, right? Which is the weird thing about the Avatar of Khaine. If you go first, you go second. It's kind of not a big deal if you go second. It's not a big deal if you go first. It's good either way. But we're not always going to do this. This is just hypothetically speaking, you know, if your opponent loads up on this side a bunch of stuff to take you out. But in a normal scenario, your opponent's probably going to assume you're going, you know, maybe they assume you're going this way, but they don't like super load up this side, right? So we keep our options open. Now, here's the other cool thing that I want to mention. Pretty much every board has choke points, and choke points are very important to determining where and when your Avatar of Khaine can get away with moving up the battlefield. It's all well and good to put them on your expansion. Most of the time, this is going to be the, you know, kind of default move, and we'll go over why the Avatar of Khaine can do a lot of damage from this position. But take a look at these beautiful babes. Warp Spiders. Warp Spiders are an insanely fast unit that can block movement lanes very easily. Now we notice here that our opponent has this Gladiator Lancer. Let's say that I wanted to move first turn my Avatar of Khaine to this position right here. If the Gladiator Lancer moves to here, it'd be a sacrifice, but if they move around to here, chances are they can see the Avatar of Khaine, right? So what can we do to prevent that from happening? Warp Spiders. We can move Warp Spiders 24 inches from a place of safety within our deployment zone to here. And we can ignore Overwatch as well. And this will basically screw your opponent out of being able to hit the Avatar back if we want to play aggressively on turn 1. So again, this is a turn 1 power play that I'm talking about here. If your opponent knows you're going towards the expansion objective, you can just take their expansion. There's nothing stopping you. They probably have units lined up here ready to go. Take them out. If your opponent has, you know, maybe like a faster but squishier unit behind here, Overwatch them, right? When they come out to basically stage right here, just Overwatch. If they try to come after your Avatar, right? So our Warp Spiders are there. That means that we can safely move up our Avatar of Khaine. His base movement's 10, so we can move him right here. Something like that. I know I'm not being totally exact here, but we can advance roll. And again, a normal advance for the Avatar of Khaine usually gets about 4 inches. So I'm just going to give him that 4 inches there, and I'm going to give him that +2 for that aspect token. We'll assume we're an aspect host. Guys, that gets us to the objective. That gets us in a perfect position. Now, there's some things your opponent can do, but they can't attack you from this angle, right? This Lancer cannot attack. They can protect, but they cannot attack. Now, the Ballistas is another story. The Ballistas can come out here and attack. But, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the weapons a Ballistas has. Its main thing is a Ballistas Last Cannon. And yes, it has 2 attacks. Yes, it does get to, you know, you have Oath of Moment and all that stuff. But at the very best, on average dice, you are taking 2 invuls and probably passing one of them. You know, the Ballistas Dreadnought, D6 +1, it's okay. You know, maybe they do 2 damage on average dice. They roll a 3 +1 is 4. You know, 2, 3 damage against the Avatar of Khaine. Not that big of a deal. Not the end of the world. Meanwhile, that Ballistas Dreadnought is now destroyed because that Ballistas Dreadnought is out in the middle of the battlefield. This is what we like to call Fire Dragon bait. So, we do have Fire Dragons. Fire Dragons are another element to this that a lot of people don't think about. We won't have Fuegan because this is quote-unquote aspect host. If we had War Host, this would be a play. 10 Fire Dragons and Fuegan. But, you know, we stage our Fire Dragons here turn 1. They're going to look better than that, but I'm just being lazy right now. Well, Fire Dragons come out. and melt this idiot, right? This is a 100 and I think 40 point model. So this is a good trade here. And the Ballistus Dreadnought only did like 2 wounds to the Avatar. Again, if the Ballistus gets super lucky and gets the Ballistus missile launchers hits in as well, that could be, you know, a little bit bad, but chances are they're not, right? Strength 10 against toughness 11, it's not going to die. And in return, this definitely dies, right? I mean, movement 8 is also... Let's even see if it's possible, right? Movement 8. Let's try to get through here. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it'd be like right here. He'd be like in the crack. Something like that. But he'd be in there. And that's not a good position for a Ballistus to be in, right? Just sticking out of here. There we go. That's what I think of the Ballistus. So, yeah, again, not a good play for the Ballistus Dreadnought. And the Avatar of Khaine actually, funnily enough, can get a battle focus maneuver. If something like was brought over here, let's say our opponent brings our, you know, the lance, it can't even move over here. Never mind, it's not going to happen. But maybe the lancer was over here, right? Maybe your opponent like guessed that you were going to do that, and we move up here and we get line of sight. Another horrible spot for a lancer to be in, by the way. The ballista shoots or the lancer shoots, whatever. Check out this line of sight lane, right? Pretty much gonna get him no matter what. But we have 2 models here that are exposed. So the Gladiator Lancer costs 160. This thing costs 140. That's 300 points worth of models that are not guaranteed to kill the Avatar of Khaine. They're not, right? You have a 4-up invul save, which should save you for most of it. The Gladiator Lancer does have some considerable weapons here, especially with, you know, Oath of Moment and all that. But your opponent's putting a lot of their army into this and not really getting the kill that they need to get. The Laser Destroyer, you know, it's hit or miss, honestly. It wounds on 3s against the Avatar of Khaine. With Oath, it's going to wound on 2s. But again, like I said, you can always command reroll, or you could do -1 to hit if you're playing in War Host. Obviously, if you're an Aspect Host, you'll get the move. You can maybe even move out of the Ballistus Dreadnoughts range, but he's probably shooting first if he's like right here. Right? Let's see. Just check real quick. Yeah, so here's the thing. If you get a high enough advance roll, though, that Avatar of Khaine can get out here, right? Now, here's the other cool thing. We moved the Warp Spiders over here, but we assumed that the Lancer was over here. If the Lancer was here instead, we could do something a little different, right? If the Lancer was there instead, we're going to have multiple units of spiders. Chances are we have a spider unit right here, right? 24 inches. Actually, we could totally block them out, right? At 27. Maybe we have to do it a little different. Hold on. 1 second. Let me basically put these guys right here. Let's see. Just for my own sanity here. Yeah. Yep, perfect. That's what I thought. Okay, so 24 puts us here. All right, this is obviously if we go first. If we go second, it's not that big of a deal because they're probably just going to sit there and do the same thing anyway. So, but they cannot go within an inch of us, so that makes that move that the Lancer wanted to do to get around impossible, right? Can't be done. If you look at the line now, the line of sight line, not nearly as good. Look at that. Can't see. Can no longer see the Avatar of Khaine. Boom, done. Right, we get all those Warp Spiders in there. Obviously, they were back here, so they're going to be right up against the wall. So, whoop, and whoop. There's my 24 inches. And of course, you can always use a battle focus token to give them that +2 for some extra security if you think you need it. Because nothing is overwatching these guys from this angle. There's just nothing. Nobody is deploying flamers here, for example, that can just toast your warp spiders, right? So you can realistically get another 2 inches out of these guys and just block your opponent from being able to Lancer the Avatar of Khaine. So you basically are going to use your warp spiders to block your opponent's anti-large that can hit your Avatar of Khaine on any given turn. Oh, probably shouldn't have deleted that, but that's okay. Okay, so that's kind of how you want to move your Avatar of Khaine up. I know that was a long explanation for something that should have been maybe a little quicker explanation, but that's how you want to kind of use him as a bully on their expansion. Now, if you're on your own expansion, you move from, somewhat like here to here, turn 1, which is very possible. It's like, 16, 17 inches here, between here and here. You are going to be totally safe from enemy shooting. The only thing you're going to have to worry about is close combat. So again, we had our Banshees right next to the Avatar, like right here. Again, we're going to move the Fire Dragons back because they're actually a unit that stays like back here and advances up into position, typically speaking. Like they're either like, behind Warp Fight or something. They advance for the next turn. So they're going to be back here somewhere. But we have our Howling Banshees, right here next to the Avatar of Khaine in a safe spot. They're going to advance. We probably advance them first so they get the bonus. But yeah, that's 17 inches. That's a token, right? That's 8 + 6 + 2 plus the Avatar's advance. Boom. All right, we got our Banshees right there next to the Avatar of Khaine. And then our Corsairs can get up onto the objective. Now, here's what we do with the Corsairs. It's a little bit of a bait, right? We're going to scout them up and then move them up here. So this is the part where it gets a little bit funny, because what we're going to do is we're going to simply put 6 OC on the objective. Maybe we put a little more. But we put 6 OC like this. And the Felarch is actually over here. Boink. And the Blaster's over here, because these guys aren't actually on the objective, right? So this gives your opponent the kind of misconception that maybe they can charge the Void Scarred or Void Reavers and kill them, right? And if they score off of it, if they get like overwhelming force for 3 or something like that, they will lose that unit, right? So they do score points, but they also lose the unit, which is, again, this works to our advantage because we're kind of more of a late game army. We want to really have all of our resources by the late game in a position to just absolutely crush primary objectives. We want to have more at the end of the game, essentially, which we probably will. So they come in here. If any Marine squad charges in, let's just say these guys charge in, I love to leave room for units like this because it just absolutely ruins their ability to, avoid heroic intervention. So they get in here. This is the only place they can come in. We're just assuming I give them the charge on something like this, right? And so they're like, oh, gotta make base if I can, right? And they're like right there. Boom. We got them. Right? Even this guy, it's 4.4 away from Banshees. We can come in with the Banshees. Now, if this unit is a type of unit that has like some sort of fight on death ability or something like that, then it's probably better to go in with the Avatar, because you can go like this, right? Boom. And then this unit right here, we're going to assume this is like a cheaper unit. I don't think any opponent in their right mind would send like full send on a squad of Void Reavers. So let's just assume these guys are like, I don't know, Sanguinary Guard. Maybe there's like 3 of them in the squad, right? It's like a squad of 3 Sanguinary Guard to score an objective. They need to get Storm Hostile or something like that. Well, they're going to wipe these Corsairs very easily, but this Avatar of Khaine, man, is just going to annihilate them, right? Even on average dice, even if I only take out 2 guys, right, and they kill all the Corsairs. right? I can easily be on the objective, easily, and just score that. Especially if I got the charge. I know deleted that, but if I actually did it, I would be like right here, right? I would get as close to the objective as possible, then just tow the objective. So then they don't get that storm hostile objective, right? Now, they will strike first, so you do have to worry about that. But also, if it's a squad of 3, you could do the Avatar of Khaine, or you could do Jane's Art. Either one's fine, right? Either one's fine here. But apparently, I don't know, these are damage too. So if your opponent has like a -1 damage, that could be a little tough. But if you have Jane, it's easy. So we kill that unit. Basically, what this means is your opponent can't score the objective, right? Your opponent's not going to try to go in there if they know they're just going to die to Howling Banshees. So our Avatar of Khaine is now set up in a perfect position. Now, I wanted to show you guys what you can do with the Avatar of Khaine from this position. That's one of the things, right? You basically force your opponent to just ignore this objective so you can score as many primary points on it as you want, as long as your opponent doesn't have any like heavy indirect fire, right? But even if your opponent does have indirect fire, you could always just move your Avatar up there and score the primary anyway. Now, from this position, this is crazy because this opens up the board considerably. Again, we're going to have units like Fire Dragons up here guarding us. We're going to have units of Warp Spiders that can move, block certain shooters. But check this out, right? So if we look at the terrain right here, the Avatar of Khaine is completely immune to shooting from anything behind this line right here. Completely immune. Anything behind this line is not going to be able to shoot the Avatar without indirect. If they march forward, however, look at that. Even from this line, completely immune to shooting. So where did your opponent actually have to be? Over here? There we go, right? Over there in this far corner, they will be able to hit the Avatar of Khaine. Now that's a pretty long distance. Guess what we're going to have over here for them? Corsair Void Reavers. Right? So if your opponent was trying to be cheeky, maybe your opponent does something like this. And this happens, by the way, right? Your opponent kind of deploys here. Maybe they notice your army doesn't have a lot of long-range anti-large, so they think they can kind of move up a little farther. And your opponent sneaks over here. Like a little sneak. Comes over here, shoots your Avatar of Khaine. That could be just free damage. I mean, probably not, because that's dead now. But, you know, we want to protect our Avatar for as long as possible. We don't want to just give our opponent free hits, right? So Corsairs can prevent this pretty easily. That's actually moved too far, I think. So I don't think it's possible really for a Gladiator Lancer to do that in turn 1, but they'll move up here first, right? So they move up there first. We can simply just block them from doing that. Boink. Just advance up, stage behind this. As long as we're not going to be overwatched. I mean, we can even go right here, and our opponent's just not going to be able to do anything about it. And we're also getting our guys within an inch of the wall, right? Probably be an inch off, so our opponent has to charge around. Inch 0.1, whatever it is. And there we go, right? Now, this could give our opponent something like Storm Hostile Objective. We do need to be aware of that kind of stuff. And the other thing about Aeldari that a lot of people need to understand, you know, a lot of people, some people watching my videos play the Aeldari and they wonder why they don't win a whole lot of games. One of the biggest things to Aeldari is understanding what your opponent has in their deck, their secondary deck, right? Keeping a mental note of what they've already drawn and what they have yet to draw. So if your opponent has already drawn by turn 2 Storm Hostile Objective, you don't have to worry about it, right? Overwhelming Force is another one where if your opponent draws that on turn 1, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Because either your opponent keeps it, which oftentimes is just basically means they score less secondary points over the course of the game. They keep it for the next turn, or they junk it and draw a new one. If they junk it, throw it away, you never have to worry about it again. So you can do things like this. Storm Hostile is worth 4, Overwhelming Force is worth 3. Never give your opponent a 5 on Overwhelming Force if you can help it, and, a 4 on Storm Hostile objective. If you can prevent it, thumbs up, but, make sure that it's a good trade for you at the very least. If your opponent scores 4 points on Storm Hostile, have something in a position to destroy them back. Right? So we could block here. Now, another thing we could do, and I know I keep saying this, guys, but we have so many Warp Spiders in our army. We'll probably have 3 units. I like 3 units, personally, even at 105. If we have Warp Spiders here, it's a done deal. Boom. What's even funnier about this is if your opponent if your opponent moves their stuff up to here to this objective, we can actually pull something really cheeky. We can do this. I love this. This kind of maneuver. Boink. So we do this kind of thing, and we just kind of make sure, again, you have 24 inches of movement, so no big deal. But we make sure that our opponent can't fit a model. I know this is a big base, but it'll work the same kind of principle. When they charge into us, we make sure that they can't just consolidate 6 onto the objective. So if they're like right here during the next turn, of course, if they shoot you and kill you, you don't have to worry about it. But we're not physically on an objective, so here's what we can do. Just make sure they're not within 6 inches, right? If they have a consolidate 6, if they don't have a consolidate 6, if they just have consolidate 3, then they can't get on it. But if they have consolidate 6, they can get on the objective. And that's going to help them with things like extend enemy battle lines. So we just want to make it as hard as possible for our opponent to score secondary objectives. We want them to have to spend resources that are a little bit maybe too expensive for what we're giving them. So we do something like this. And again, this is kind of a cheeky thing, but this is what you do with Eldar. This is how you win with Eldar. 3 inches. We have the rest of our unit here, and we just kind of spread them out a little bit. And this is going to also kind of play into that avatar thing we were talking about. So we could do, we have to be outside of an inch, but we could do something like this, right? Where we're just outside of an inch. Boom. And now, if your opponent wants to charge you with the Gladiator Lancer and nothing else, well, yeah, they can get on the objective, but they're going to be vulnerable, right? They're going to have to waste a vulnerable piece scoring that objective point, and we could just, again, bring up Fire Dragons. If they do that, Fire Dragons can easily, move from here, this wall right here, into here, and just blow it up. So your opponent has to watch out for all these things against the Aeldari, right? And we can make it really hard for our opponent. Now, if your opponent shoots these Warp Spiders, that's even better, because then the Warp Spider can just die, and our opponent's not going to get the objective. So if our opponent moves here, for example, with their squad, and they have their big unit here or whatever, and, maybe they get even closer. Maybe they're just outside of an inch of our guys. They're ready to charge in and everything. And, we could overwatch them. Maybe we don't. But, if they shoot us, which at this point they can't, then they can't make the charge. So they won't get the objective and they're out in the open. Right? So we're putting our opponent in a position where, again, they have to make tough choices. Do I shoot them and then they just flicker jump, or, they just fade back and then they're out of charge range? Do I just shoot them and, risk killing them? My opponent can always just choose to roll a Zinvol save against bolters. By the way, you can do that. So if somebody like fires bolters at you to try to be cheeky, oh, I'm not going to kill your whole unit, I'll just leave you at one model. Take your invul save. Be like, okay, I know I normally get a 3+ save and cover. I'm going to take my invul save so the squad dies. Squad's dead. Now you're out in the open, right? So there's things you can do like that. So this forces a lot of things to come in here because we've prevented these guys from getting on the objective. Now the Gladiator Lancer has to charge too. It's a whole thing, right? Gladiator Lancer can't move, so we have an Avatar of Khaine coming up, right? If we chose that strategy I told you earlier, where we were like, big dick Avatar over here, we moved them like here instead, then our opponent's in a really bad spot here. So there's a lot that goes into the Avatar being effective, and I think, maybe I'm even underselling it by this, and I'm kind of maybe over explaining it a little bit, but there's a lot the Avatar can basically force your opponent to do. Now, specifically in Warhost, your Avatar is going to be a little more wily, so your opponent can't just tie him up with something cheap, right? Because he can just fall back, shoot, and charge. And the Avatar can move through here, right? The Avatar can move along the sides of the board in this terrain setup. So you can have the Avatar, right? Oops. You can have the Avatar here like we discussed, right? And then he can move, 7.5. 2.5 plus a token is 4.5. This squad's going to be dead by then. But he can move up to like here pretty easily, shoot this thing. Not going to kill it, but, shoot and charge this thing and then be in a position right here in your opponent's backfield, right? And then if they shoot you back, right, they have to bring stuff back here. They have to keep units. They have to keep units in their own backfield, so they can't interact as well with the objectives. They can't interact as well with the rest of your army. And then once they shoot you once, you could just go, whoosh, potentially just move out of line of sight here, right? Which is great for you. Yeah, maybe they can still see you from there. But, it gives you the chance to move farther back and be out of range or out of line of sight. So there's a lot of angles to this. But the Avatar of Khaine for 280 can exert a lot of pressure on your opponent for that low amount of points. And to put it in perspective for you guys, a squad of fire dragons is 120. He's only a little tiny bit, he's only 40 points more than 2 squads of minimum fire dragons, and he has a lot better chance of making more of an impact. And obviously you're going to have both in your army anyway, so that's kind of a bad point there. But think about him like, that's 3 squads of Dark Reapers is an Avatar of Khaine. What do Dark Reapers do? They hang in the back and they shoot. That's it. Beforehand, we were using Fuegan and 10 fire dragons and a wave serpent. Well, the Avatar of Khaine is basically a wave serpent and Fuegan plus a couple more points, right? 40 more points. So if you drop Fuegan and the wave serpent, you can almost get an Avatar of Khaine for that cost. So this is really when I started to realize, oh wow, actually, this fits rather well. And if I was running 3 squads of Hawks before, I can account for all the nerfs and I can drop a squad of Hawks. I'm running 2 squads of Hawks, which is still good, still enough, and I can have my Avatar of Khaine, I can have my Cake and Eat It too, and I can have my 2 squads or 3 squads of Fire Dragons, or my 2 squads or 3 squads of Dark Reapers, whatever you want. Okay, so that's it. Now, I will say this as a last kind of parting remark here. Once your Avatar gets into a position that your opponent cannot deal with effectively, you have basically won the game. So if you're able to do that and your opponent's having to go hard after your Avatar, there's not a big chance that your opponent's going to be able to come back from the game in points. They may be able to kill a lot of your stuff, but if you keep playing the objective game, they're going to have trouble winning on objectives, because again, their mindset has been, oh, I need to kill the Avatar, he's going to wreck my army now, instead of, oh, I need to focus on objectives and score points, right? So that's it. That's all I got. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think of the Avatar of Khaine. I know some of you are Khaine lovers out there that have been using him probably much longer than I have and probably have better insights as well. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you like to play the Avatar of Khaine. I know that a couple of really good Aeldari players over in the, kind of competitive Aeldari scene that go to GTs all the time are thinking of bringing the Avatar of Khaine. Some already have. There was a person at Worlds who brought the Avatar of Khaine, and several others in Aspect Host, although I do think Warhost is a viable, detachment for him as well. So the Avatar of Khaine is kind of edging in to competitive play. I know it seems weird, but I think maybe one of the main reasons is because he's so good at killing heavy infantry. He's really good particularly against Victrix Honor Guard, because they don't have an invul save, so he just kind of chews through them pretty quick. So, being able to just do big dick, D6 plus 2 damage against them just basically insta-kills them with their new wound profile of a 3. So, it's hard for them to actually survive against the Avatar of Khaine, especially when he's still wounding on 3s. And in Aspect Host, he is rerolling 1s to hit. So, think about that. Alright guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 3 years. Your help has been greatly appreciated and has made the channel and me much better. So thank you for that. Also, if you do want to become a Patreon member and join our Discord, it is totally free to become a Patreon member at the free level. I'd always appreciate the support, but if you just want to join the Discord, again, absolutely free. You just have to sign up for a Patreon free trial, and that will give you access to our Discord via a link. If you don't get the link for whatever reason, you can always, just message me and I will give you the link. Sometimes the links expire, unfortunately, like very quickly. It just depends, I guess, on whatever Discord's timing is, but it's like after like a week or 2 weeks it expires sometimes. So just be aware of that, and that you can message me and I will give you the link. Lastly, if you're interested in any Eldar apparel, visit my channel store page. Seriously, I have a link in the description. You can get Eldar beanies, hats, shirts, sweatshirts, anything you want to bring to the hobby shop to rep your favorite faction. Don't be shy. Support Eldred. And that's it. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.